Hi there. Right now you probably think I'm on a nice leisurely stroll out on the countryside. Well, would you believe me if I told you that right now I'm only a 10-minute walk away from what is more or less a small city? And no, I'm not kidding. Check this out. That little piece of skyline you see right behind me there is only a small portion of the Milwaukee Regional Medical Center. And while it's not technically a city, it's still the largest medical center in the state of Wisconsin. Now, you wouldn't be able to tell based on my surroundings here, but where I'm standing was home to a second medical campus. And while it's long gone, there's still several pieces of it that still remain. Right now I'm at the Milwaukee County grounds, over 500 acres of locally owned land that's been in use for about 150 years. Now, you wouldn't know it just on looks alone, but the area behind me was once home to the Milwaukee County Asylum for the Insane. With that said, it kind of makes sense why it's long gone. By the 1980s, the concept of insane asylums were long outdated. In the case of the Milwaukee County institution, it was mostly gone by 1995, leaving essentially no trace. Well, that's not entirely true, actually. In fact, if you look close enough, you'll find that there's actually plenty left behind from that bygone era of what your parents probably still unfortunately call funny farms. Everything you see behind me here is sanctuary woods, a small patch of old-growth forest that way back in the day essentially acted as the backyard to the asylum complex. From fallen esplanades to sidewalks leading to nowhere, there's plenty left behind to explore. For example, the stairs that you see right here are once what led to an overlook that looked over a lake to the west and a sunken garden to the east. This lake served as leisure for the patients until it was eventually filled in the mid-80s, leaving behind only a hand-built water feature that once stood on an island in the middle of the lake. Now, before we move to our next location, we're actually going to hear a little bit of history about this place from our good friend Johnathan Piel, who is basically the representative historian for the area.
My name's Johnathan Piel. I'm the volunteer president of Friends of County Grounds Park. Much of this park was put into park status in 2019, and part of that advocacy to make it a park was helping people understand the history of this space. In the 1880s, this was the location of the Milwaukee County Asylum for the acutely insane, and today we would call it a mental health hospital. And in the 1880s, this would have been a almost 1 day's horse ride from Milwaukee. Now, at that time, this really was far away. And by 1880, when this hospital was established, the vast majority of patients had the opportunity to be outdoors in this wooded area.
That wooded area? Sanctuary woods. An interesting aspect about some of the ruins you'll find in sanctuary woods is that they weren't built by the institution itself, but rather by the patients. These stairs, commonly known as the women's stairs, were entirely handcrafted well over 100 years ago.
So this is the women's ravine, and these stairs go down into the women's ravine. These would have been built by patients, for patients. The patients doing it were also learning a skill that they could use once they were discharged from the hospital. Over the years, of course, these stairs have fallen into significant disrepair. The Women's Grove included a creek that ran through it. In fact, it ran through a historic ravine. And for the benefit of the women's patients, they ended up building stairways up and down into this ravine, and we're standing at one of those stairways right now.
Just a stone's throw north, on the men's side of the woods, is another great example of handiwork done by patients, for patients. Here's our friend JP again to tell us a little about it.
This area is called the Men's Pavilion. At the time, they would have divided up the hospital between men and women. They would have also divided the grove into a men's grove and a women's grove. We're in the men's grove. This is a pavilion in the men's grove, so it's called the Men's Pavilion. This pavilion would have actually had walls and a roof when it was built in the early 1900s, and it would have had picnic tables in here. And then over to the left over here is an area that's risen up. There would have been a fireplace on here, some kind of a stove that they could have warmed up on a cool spring morning or a cool fall night.
There's something over here that I always love looking at
yes.
whenever I visit. And it's that where the wall breaks away here, you can see it's a good example of how this was put together by hand by the patients. It's
Yep,
so,
that's
like,
exactly right. So
patchworked.
the patients would have been learning a craft while they were here. They had to be able to go out and have a job that they could keep and earn a living at as part of that financial health. And so they were taught different trades, including masonry trades. And this was not a funded endeavor. So they used whatever stone was available. And over the years, this has worn away, and you can see what had been hidden for nearly 100 years is now exposed in that patient work.
So tell me about the tray here.
Yeah, this men's pavilion would have been sited in the middle of the old growth forest and surrounded by mature trees, including this bur oak tree here. We know that this tree is in excess of 300 years old. This is the oldest tree in this forest. They would have poured cement for walkways around it, and we're kind of standing on one of those walkways right now, and you can see that over the last 100 years, the tree has continued to displace even the cement that was here. So as this place isn't used the same way anymore, this old growth forest, including this tree, continues to thrive.
The late 80s onward proved to be a turbulent time for the county institutions, especially for the asylums. For every building that came up, an older counterpart came down. First went the main building, then the small lake, and then finally the receiving building. By 1995, most of the complex had been reduced to nothing more than roads and sidewalks to nowhere. And obviously, here, today, 30 years later, Mother Nature has taken its course. Among some of the remaining fixtures at the County Grounds Park is a much more somber reminder of the past. 3 cemeteries, one on either side of the grounds, remain undisturbed. Each one holds the remains of hundreds of former patients and residents of the Poor Farm and asylums, many of which are unmarked.
Right now we're at the Milwaukee County Cemetery, also known as Potter's Field. This is where people would have been buried from 1872 all the way up to 1974. 4,000 people are interred in this cemetery. While they were interred in close graves with wooden markers, none of those wooden markers exist anymore. They've disintegrated over time. But there are still some gravestones in there that have been put in more recent years, since 1974. And over the years, as people have done genealogy and they realize that they had a loved one who would have been interred here in this Potter's Field, they sometimes contracted having a headstone placed in this field. And so there are a few tombstones still in this field, and they are placed randomly because the ledger of who was buried where has been lost to time. And so this is the asylum cemetery associated with that hospital. It's a significantly overgrown cemetery. The cemetery was actually lost and forgotten for many decades, and all of the headstones or markers have disappeared over the years. And so while we might just look at this as a spooky cemetery and perhaps people with mental health challenges who were buried here, it's good to know that they were also full people who had full lives and different chapters in those lives, and some of those chapters included the need for mental health treatment.
What used to be a scattered collection of buildings across a widespread area is now home to a dense, ever-evolving complex that contains not just 1, not 3, but 5 different organizations operating within it. Though the Hospital for the Insane is long gone, Sanctuary Woods remains as a living testament for those who lived, loved, and worked hard to better their lives while staying at the institution. Mr. Piel, the fine fellow who's been giving us this tour, alongside the County Grounds Park Friends Association, have worked tirelessly to keep the history of this place alive. In 2017, the woods were threatened with demolition and possible redevelopment. Thankfully, Mr. Piel and the Friends Association were able to successfully save the old growth forest, and since then have maintained it, creating trails and placing informational signs at a few key landmarks. Today, the woods are a popular spot for not just history lovers, but nature lovers as well.
And so a little at a time, we've been doing some restoration work. The county is still divining through where they want paths in this area and how much of this is historic infrastructure that can be touched or shouldn't be touched anymore. And again, the patients would have built this. They did it to be able to beautify the environment for themselves and for the other patients, and they learned to trade while they did it.